Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCod.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm here in the studio with Donna Walcovy, who has a second career, if you will, as a gravesite restorer. Donna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laura.
Now, we're talking about special graveyard tours that you do, but let's talk first about how you first got interested in graveyards. What is your background?
Well, actually, my aunt and uncle were funeral directors and in Pennsylvania. And during a 10-year period, they buried 56 members of the family. So I was constantly at Mass and then in a church for having a family member buried. But as I really got interested, I've been working on my family history. But when I moved here to the Cape, I joined the Falmouth Genealogical Society, and they started a project called the Cemetery Transcription Project. And we went into the cemeteries and we recorded what was written on the gravestones and took a picture, and I designed a website for it. But I was really appalled at the condition of the gravestones, and I said, somebody's got to know how to fix these things. And as it turns out, there are people who know how to fix them. I went first to the Association of Gravestone Studies and went to their conferences and took some classes, and then took classes around the country and volunteered with other cemetery conservators to learn my trade.
So you took the initiative, just being very interested in the graveyards and so forth, to really learn how to do the actual hands-on restoration.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of graveyards. When I was a kid, my grandmother on Saturdays, I had one or two playgrounds she took me to, Valley Forge or Independence Hall. And, of course, got interested in those old graveyards around Independence Hall and the slate gravestones and the imaging on them and what it all meant. And actually, my first film in college, I went to school at Emerson in Boston, I shot in the Granary Burying Ground. So I've had an affinity for old graveyards for a long time. But just looking at the condition of the stones, I mean, if you're going to sit something outside for 250 years, it's going to be attacked by weather. And learned how to repair them.
Since that first sort of getting interested in graveyard restoration and gravestone restoration, you've actually completed a number of graveyard restorations.
In Falmouth, I mean, I've worked in other towns. I actually work in, when I go down to the Philadelphia area, the graveyard where I'm going to be buried is a historic burying ground, and I've done some restoration work there. And actually, we don't use the word restoration. Restoration means make like new. And I can't make a gravestone that's been sitting outside for 200 years look like new.
Nor would you want to,
no.
Probably.
We preserve it or we conserve it, and we use both words interchangeably. But it's something that needs to be done. And what it means to me really is preserving the history of a community where I work. But in Falmouth, I have completely done the East Falmouth Burying Ground, the Methodist Society Burying Ground, and out in Woods Hole, the Village Burying Ground. And I do little odd jobs here and there, gravestone here, whatever. I'm now working on a grant through the Community Preservation Committee from Falmouth on preserving the lots, all the gravestones in the lots of the guys who fought in the War of 1812 who are buried in Oak Grove Cemetery in Falmouth.
It's fascinating, the history that comes from all this. And I know that there are wonderful ancient cemeteries all through the Cape, all the way out to the Outer Cape and here in the Mid-Cape, too. Is the Cape unique when it comes to these ancient burial grounds, or do we have these all across the country the way we do here?
No, it's a New England thing. And if you really want to look at some really beautiful old ancient burying grounds, you have to go to where the first settlements were, Boston, Plymouth, and where the Pilgrims and the Puritans spread out from after there. You'll find some of them in New Hampshire along the coastline, but you're not going to find something like this in Ohio.
Now, you're obviously fascinated by these graveyards. What can we learn from graveyards? There's a lot of history there.
There's an unbelievable amount of history. I can give you one example in Falmouth. Desire Bourne. She died in 1705. It happens to be the oldest gravestone in the town of Falmouth. It is the only record of her life. I can find no birth record on her, and she's probably born in England anyway. I can find no marriage record on her. I can find no record of any children. And the only record of her life is her gravestone that says that she existed. You got to go back to 1705. Women were, thought of more like cattle than they are today. So her even having a gravestone is quite unusual for something to go back that far. Usually it was the men.
And the fact that we have a 1705 gravestone, and when you found that, I would think that would be sort of an exciting find. Not too many, I would think, around those years in the Cape's graveyards. Is that right?
We go back to the late 1600s, and there's a wonderful website called Cape Cod Gravestones. It's done by Bob Carlson, who's also an Association of Gravestone Studies member, and he has researched the cemeteries on all the towns in the Cape. And he has listed there who's buried there. In some cases, there are photographs. And in some cases, he started doing research now on the carvers of who carved the gravestone. So it's a wonderful, delightful website. And whatever town you live in, it's a great thing to pack a picnic lunch and your camera and go to some of these old cemeteries and look around. You learn a lot of history about the town.
That's a phenomenal reference, and I'll have to definitely check that out. Now, as we said at the beginning of the show, you do these tours of graveyards. Take us on an imaginary tour of a graveyard. What kinds of things do you point out to people?
Well, most of the graveyards that I've done tours in, I've actually also worked in doing preservation work. So one of the things that I like to teach people is the process of preservation and how important it is. What if we lose this gravestone? We've lost a record of somebody's life. Actually, the first thing I like to do is teach people how to clean a gravestone, which most people don't know how to do properly. All you need is potable, means drinkable water, clear water, and make sure the gravestone is really, really wet. When I have young children on my tours, I bring super soakers with me. So I let the kids have a fun time with the super soaker on the gravestone, get it nice and wet. And you use a soft scrub brush, and you just scrub in circular motions, keeping the gravestone very, very wet, and then rinse it off. And you'd be amazed at how wonderful it looks. What I tell people, because people get an idea of a scrub brush, and it's a new one, not something you've used in the kitchen, brand new, so there's been no chemicals on it. And I tell the women to put the brush on their face. And if it hurts their face, don't use it on the gravestone. Of course, guys look at me like, what is she talking about? What I say to the men is, would you wash your car with that scrub brush? And they get the idea. But no chemicals are used whatsoever. You can start to increase the deterioration of the gravestone. A lot of people look at marble gravestones, which are white, and they think bleach, which is the completely wrong thing to do. What'll happen is the bleach gets into the stone, and the stone will start to eat itself from the inside out, and you're just hastening its demise. So that's the first thing I do. Then we talk about, as we're wandering around, the people whose graves we walk by and the stones. When I work on a stone, I get really interested in the person, so I start doing research on them, find out who their parents were, who they were married to. You go into a lot of old graveyards on the Cape, and you'll see the husband, and then you may see 2 or 3 wives buried next to him. Now, it wasn't that the guy was fooling around and the wives said, "See you later, Charlie." If you were a woman back in colonial times, there were 2 things that were hazardous to your survival. One was childbirth. We didn't have the medicine we have now. The other was cooking. If you've ever been into one of these old colonial homes and have gone into the cook area, there are these huge, huge fireplaces. And that's where they cook the bread and everything else. Well, these women were wearing long skirts, and a coal could get out of the area, ignite the skirt. There was nobody home. The small children were home, swaddled in a cradle, but everybody was out working, and they went up in flames.
I would have guessed childbirth. I would not have guessed cooking. So that's fascinating information. And I love that we now all know how to clean the gravestones in the correct way. I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm talking to Donna Walcovy, who restores gravestones and gives graveyard tours here on the Cape. Now, talking about because this work you do on the gravestones, this is very labor-intensive work. And
unbelievably labor-intensive.
We talked about the Community Preservation Act funds. Is that typically where your funding comes from?
Yes, typically. It's expensive to do this. It's labor-intensive. Last summer, my company and I, it's just me and two guys that work for me, their job is to pick things up and put them down, jokingly. But we worked on Abigail Adams' mother's gravestone, which was a slate and had been separating. That's what slate does. And I figure they probably started about 1930 because that was the 300th anniversary of the founding of Boston. So there was a lot of preservation work that went on.
Now, what graveyard is that one in?
That's in the North Weymouth Cemetery. And they kept shoving over the decades cement down between the areas that were delaminating. Well, you can't do a repair over an old repair. So I had to get rid of all of that cement. And I counted it up. We spent 157 hours hand chipping off the cement. I can't use power tools because it could damage the gravestone. And in fact, we had to split the gravestone to be able to get all the way down in there to clean out all the cement and all the dirt. I mean, there's tree roots and all sorts of interesting things that you'll find inside of old slate gravestones that have grown into them. So it's very labor-intensive. Also, the materials that I use historic lime mortars. There's a place in Pennsylvania where I get them. If it's a stone of an unusual color, as was Abigail Adams' mom's gravestone, I'll send a sample, and they will make a mortar that matches exactly, so it doesn't look weird when you're finally finished with it. But that stuff's expensive. And there is an additional cleaning product that I use that I really don't want to tell people about. I get 5 gallons for $500. So it's not the sort of thing the average person is going to have. Just using water and the soft gravestone will do it. If you haven't been trained, don't try and fix a gravestone. Some people want to help, and the best thing you can do to help if you find a gravestone lying on the ground is go to the local lumber company, and they usually have leftover pieces of wood. You're going to need several people to help you. Lift the stone up, place the wood under it, and carefully place the stone down to keep it off the ground. Because when it's on the ground, what happens is things grow on the ground, and they can grow into the gravestone and do even more damage than if it was raised off the ground. So you're preventing additional damage. You should also notify whoever's in charge of the graveyard that you've discovered this.
And I want to go back because I'm intrigued. I can't stop thinking about Abigail Adams' mother. When did she come to this country, or was it this country yet?
I think she was born in England, and her father was the first minister there in the Weymouth area, Reverend Smith. Her maiden name was Smith, and it's fascinating to go that far back and to see history. And actually, her son, who's a very important figure, as we know, is the president, but he's more important to me because of what he did for the Hancock Cemetery, which is in Quincy Center, which is, if you're up there, go visit. In the olden days, they let the cattle roam in the cemetery. That's what kept the grass down. Nobody mowed grass. That wasn't the thing to do. So the cattle did it. Well, I grew up on a farm as a kid, and if a cow's got an itch, it's going to find something to rub against, and boom, there goes down a gravestone. 150 years of dirt on top of it, mulch, and just becomes dirt. So it's subterranean. We don't know it's there. And this is true in a lot of old gravestones. There's a lot of gravestones that are there you can't see. They're probably 6 inches or so below the grade of the graveyard. But John Adams specified that no cattle would be grazed in Hancock Cemetery. So because of that effort of a young John Adams before he was president, that has preserved those gravestones there.
That's fascinating. He knew about the dangers of cattle in graveyards, and so he took those steps.
Yes, he did.
Now, you have these tours, and I want to make sure to give people all the information about the tours, and graveyards can really be part of a tourist itinerary of the Cape because it's so rich in history. So tell me the times and days of the tours.
I give the tours at Oak Grove Cemetery, where I'm currently working as preservation work. We have 2 tours left for the summer. They're Monday, July 27th. We start at 10, finished about 11:30. And then the last one, although we may extend it, will be August 10th. Again, at 10 o'clock. It's a Monday, 10 o'clock in the morning, finished about 11:30. We asked people, old graveyards really don't have parking lots. So we asked people to come in and park near the chapel that is there, which is absolutely beautiful, which was built in the 1930s. And there's a wide lane or road near the chapel. So we asked people to park on either side. And we start in the chapel so people can see it. I also have several photographs of people that are buried there. One of the guys who's buried there is William C. Davis. Davis owned a furniture store in Falmouth, and if you go to Falmouth and you see Barbo's Furniture, that's where the Davis Furniture Company was. And he made his own furniture. So people would come by and say, hey, Granny died, I need a coffin. So he'd make the coffin. Then he realized there was money in burying the person and overseeing the whole thing. So he was the first funeral director in Falmouth. And I have a photograph of him. I have a photograph of the horse-drawn hearse. And I also went to the Falmouth Historical Society. They had his original records. So they were kind enough to let me scan some of them that related to people who are buried in Oak Grove Cemetery. So I have scans of the original records that he wrote down of people buried there.
Lots of wonderful history that people are going to get if they go on your tour. And I'm sure you spend a lot of time in the town clerk's office finding out all this information about this. This is really a part of history.
It is, the town clerk's office. Also, I spend a lot of time up in Boston at the New England Historic Genealogical Society, doing a lot of research there, and also in the Mass Archives, which is near UMass Boston. Oak Grove has some pretty important people there. Probably the most famous for Falmouth would be Catherine Lee Bates, who was the professor. She was a college professor like I used to be one time. And she wrote the poem America the Beautiful, which several years later was set to music. And it's a song that all children learn in grammar school, and we all know it.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we could go for another half hour on this, to tell you the truth.
I could go another week on this.
This is really good stuff, but we'll have you back. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I've been speaking to Donna Walcovy about the ancient graveyards here on Cape Cod and a tour she gives in Falmouth through Oak Grove Cemetery. Thank you so much, Donna, for being here with me today.
It was a pleasure, Laura, and I hope to see everybody real soon.
Absolutely. I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.